Hey everyone, welcome to the Daring to Dad podcast, where we have conversations at the intersections of fatherhood, masculinity, and faith. My name is Ryan. I am the host of this podcast. I'm also a dad coach, working with dads, helping guys experience more joy, less stress, and deeper connection in their experience as dads. I love this topic. I'm curious about it. I love to see what different dads are up to in the world, to hear their stories. Guys are out there influencing this conversation. And today's guest is Zack Kasabo. He's a certified school counselor who has worked with kids K through 12 over the last 8 years, and is also the owner of Kasabo Behavior Management, which is a coaching service that helps parents really manage their kids' challenging behavior with confidence. I just recently started following Zack on social media. I love what he's putting out there. I love his clarity, the practical insights he gives, and I was like, man, I gotta have this guy on the podcast. So really excited to share my conversation with Zack with you today. Here it is. Zack, welcome to the Daring to Dad podcast. So happy to have you on, man.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Yeah, this is really our first time meeting and connecting. So I know I would love to hear it from you, and I'm sure the audience would love to hear it as well. Give us some context about what you do and what you're up to in the world.
Sure. So I have a master's in school counseling. I've been a school counselor since 2017. Just a little bit before that, I worked with adjudicated youth. So those were teenagers who were it was essentially jail or this placement. That experience led me to seeking additional schooling, and I still wanted to work with kids, just in a different setting. Although I would like to revisit that now with my current experience, but that led me to get my counseling degree. And then I've worked with kids from preschool to 12th grade, and I've also worked with high school athletes. So the reason I like to share that is because I do have a range of experience with different ages. I've also been fortunate to work with all different backgrounds. So kids who come from extremely wealthy situations to kids who are extremely impoverished. So with that sample size, I think that's where a lot of my traction has come from on social media over the past years, because I think it's a really authentic message that's landing with a lot of people.
Yeah. I want to get back to how you've really blown up on social media, but I want to get back even further. What experiences in your life led you to this kind of work?
Yeah, so personally, I struggle with some mental health concerns, and I still do to this day. I've just figured out what has worked for me. So I think when I reflect on my childhood, and I was absolutely blessed. Like, I had an awesome family. For whatever reason, I just had the proclivity for being a little more neurotic and getting stuck on negative feelings, and that led to poor decisions and other mental health concerns. So I think I would really like to take that experience and then share what I've learned, both personally and professionally, and then give back to people. So that's what led to working with other kids and now parents and adults.
Man, it's always amazing how I found this in my life. The places of pain for us is often the healing for others, right? The things we've been through, the experiences that we've had that seemingly difficult becomes our medicine for the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that we lots of times we think that our situation's super unique, and of course everyone's unique in their own way, but usually our experience, almost always, other people are experiencing it in some capacity. So when we go in and we find ways to heal ourselves, like that, like you said, that medicine that we come out with almost always can translate to other people's lives and can provide them with relief too.
Yeah. I came across your work on social media, and you put out these great pieces of content and just drop these just truth bombs, just soaked in experience that you've had, real life experience, your experience as an educator and working directly with kids. And I've just found it to be so valuable and refreshing, and it's really blown up for you. And I want to hear a little bit about what that's been like. Why do you think this has blown up so much?
Yeah. So, when I first started this, first of all, I had no intentions of starting a business. I shouldn't say none, but like it just wasn't on my radar, or definitely not social media, because it's funny because you or someone else might come across and be like, this dude, like he's done this before, he's comfortable with it. And of course, now with all the reps I've done, that I do appear comfortable, but it's just not. If people know me growing up, like I was super shy and like extremely shy. So it is interesting to see, you know, that it has gone to where it's gotten. But it did start with a colleague of mine at a school that I used to work for. He pushed me, challenged me. So that's what was like the initial impetus. And I think, and you touched on this, and I touched on this so far as well. Something about what I'm saying is cutting through a lot of the noise that people are hearing online, because there's just and a lot of the, when I say noise, I don't want to be condescending, because it is coming from a good place, and I think people are definitely trying to provide a perspective that wasn't offered in the past. Like that's 100% valid. But with that comes a lot of uh, just a lack of clarity, and it's like it feels good, and it sounds good, but it's not necessarily practical, or it's not necessarily something that's sustainable, and something that you can do like day after day. So to answer your question, I do think that there's a practical element that just isn't, and I shouldn't say it isn't, but it's just I'm one of the fewer voices out there. Like there's definitely other people who have this very similar message. So I think that's where a lot of the detraction has come from.
Yeah, I think that I was drawn to it in that way too. And I know for me, working specifically with men, with dads, there's really a hunger for clarity, right? Especially in kind of the online therapeutic space, right? Like there's a lot of fluff, right? There's a lot of people who talk, and there's a lot of words, and you get to the end of watching something, you're like, I have no idea like what was just said. There is a real lack of clarity, and I do find that refreshing. So I think that makes a lot of sense, what you're saying, and I think that's why I was drawn to some of what you have to say, because hey, here's a reason, here's some practical steps. Maybe there are some answers. Yes, it has to be contextualized and for you and your situation and all that, but that makes a lot of sense to me. The clarity is really, really important.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm definitely interested to talk to you more about the male perspective on some of this stuff, and the lack of influence right now that men are having on the space. Because that's not that one thing that I quickly discovered as a small business owner, is that you have to know your audience, and you have to know your client. And it's not that, like, obviously I still have my own things, personal beliefs that I don't necessarily share or espouse online, but I have posted stories before, and there have been reels that have been a little more to one side or the other than my audience is used to, and the pile-on is real. Like, people come out of the woodwork just to let you know how awful of a person you are, and that doesn't bother me. Like, it is what it is. Fortunately, I've had enough experiences in education, working with extremely challenging behaviors, where I've heard it. You call me the meanest thing, or say the meanest thing, like it. But I'm interested to talk, definitely, hear what you have to say about it for sure, and then just talk, go back and forth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's another reason why I was drawn to your work, and you being not only having a background, the education, the experience, but just being a male in education right now. I have two kids. I have an 11-year-old and a 7-year-old, and while I appreciate so much about their school and where they go, there might be 2-3 guys on campus, and I hear this from other people as well, and the importance of male role models in schools, men who are actively participating in the mental, emotional, physical well-being of kids, right? And so I think that's really important as well. What's been your experience with that, and like men involved in this work and seeing it out there?
Yeah, so I can particular speak on education. So at this point, I've worked with my internship included, and other settings. I've worked at least 6 or 7, if not more, settings, and it's always extreme minority that men represent an extreme minority. And again, as I'm talking about this, I'm already trying to be mindful of how my message comes across, because I can already hear, and I'm not saying this is definitely going to happen, but I can anticipate that people are going to start saying, like, well, you're playing the victim, like you're playing, with this male voice, and like you're trying to lift up this voice that's been, or this, this approach that's been represented for decades. And again, it's valid, but yeah, so we're definitely, we're there, but we're not, we don't, there's few of us for sure, and it's just, we just have to be, we have to be a little mindful of the way in which we bring things up, because it is there is a particular lens that especially with education, that we look at kids in particular, and the way in which kids should be taught and raised, and obviously all men don't think the same, so I don't want, let me just pause and just say like that, like let me just hard pause. But yeah.
I found it true even in like the therapeutic space, right? Less than 25% of therapists are men, and there's a lot of men who are looking for the kind of support that they need and might like highly benefit, and even less so for like men of color. Like the percentage is even smaller. Like, hey, if you're a man of color and you want to find a male therapist of color, like good luck. It's very very challenging. And I think that I'm an advocate for that. It's in out of not of like, oh, it's bad to have all women, but I know, speaking to like teachers and educators, like there's a need for that. Like the principal of my kid's school is like, God, I would love like more like presence, from not just like teachers and administrators, but like even like men in the community and those types of things, to be involved in these young boys' lives, who are out there figuring out how to like play sports and like be aggressive with each other, and like how to trash talk on the basketball court, and like, but like what's the boundaries, and like teaching them all these things, right? Like that's sometimes like and so I just find that really interesting. I love that you're like doing this work, because I think that's incredibly important.
Yeah, and those are all those things you just shared. If there isn't, and women can of course talk about this, and they can absolutely coach these, especially young boys, they can coach them up.
Yep.
It's not the same. Same with me talking to girls about girl drama. Like it's a big part of my job. There, it's not the same. It's not. Yeah. And I understand that, and I accept that, and I'm still going to do the best I can, and I'm gonna be empathetic, and I'm gonna be understanding. But it's. And obviously having rapport and relationship does make things go better, which is integral to any helping relationship. But those are things that I think are actually being, I don't know if conditioned out of boys is the right way of saying it, but it's I think it's like the boundaries are too limited with boys. Like you don't trash talk ever. It's like part of being a young man is one way that we show intimacy is we push boundaries with our friends. Like we cross the line, but then we can also recognize like that was too far, like I need to stop. It's not like no, it's like I'm gonna go like this far and he's gonna come this far back at me, and then we're gonna either it's gonna be a problem, or like we're gonna realize that we can do this, and then we get closer because of it.
Yeah. I'd be curious to know what are some of these things. You got into it and talking about boundaries, like with these, with young boys, maybe young boys in particular. Maybe we can sit on for a minute. Like, what are some of the things that you're finding in your work that are evolving, like with young boys, young men? What are some of those things that are coming to the surface for them right now?
Yeah. So I think there's definitely. Let me think about this for 1 second. From my experience and my view, there's definitely, I don't know if it's overcompensating, just because there isn't that voice or that model to follow, and they're kind of just going for whatever to see what feels right. But I do think that young boys, that there's a lack of authenticity, because there's this immense pressure to fit into criteria to make sure that they're saying the right things, acting the right way. And of course, developmentally, it's not going to happen anyway as they find themselves. But with that pressure and without that model, that's where I think the overcompensation comes from. And then there could be like the more aggression, or there could be hyper masculinity versus like, let me reel it in. Like I know I can be assertive. I don't have to always be aggressive. So that's something that I've seen for sure, and that is imperative during their kids' formative years. So even before, pre-elementary and elementary, like these boys need to see assertiveness from a man, so they understand if I want to exercise this natural tendency to maybe be a protector or to maybe be safe, like this is what it looks like, and I don't have to go out there and go over the top with what I say to people, or I don't have to go over the top and be like physically aggressive when it's not necessary.
Right.
So that's one school in mind, and there definitely are there always are cultural differences, and here's the thing too that surprises a lot of people, mostly with regard to class. So sometimes we think race is the big difference. I would say almost always the bigger differences come from differences in class and how things are handled. But that's my experience. I'm not speaking for everyone.
Can you say more about that? Like, talk about what are some of those differences? How does that play out?
So the way in which young boys are expected to solve problems. So in general, again, this is a generality. I'm not speaking specifically. Every child is different.
Yeah.
It's a shame I always have to put that disclaimer out there. But if I don't, people take my message out of context.
Yeah. I get it.
But especially young boys who are lower in socioeconomic status, there's a much greater pressure to be more hands-on and to be more independent with regard to solving problems. Like, go do it yourself. You're going to need to figure this out yourself. And with that, in those situations, these boys are expected to be men at a very young age, and of course, cognitively and physically, they're nowhere near being men. So, like, that's when the pendulum or not the pendulum, but these overcorrections or overreactions occur. Not that this doesn't happen with higher SES, especially if kids come from a competitive family with sports, or if they come from a highly competitive family like with career, you do see those tendencies as well. But there's and across classes, across races, there's a need. There's definitely a need, and it's not represented in schools. This has been my experience both personally, professionally, online. Mm-hmm. There isn't necessarily like a guiding voice for what a man should be like. I think what happens because of that, you just have the extremes. You have like the extreme, super, maybe like you have like the feminine versus the hyper feminine versus the hyper masculine. Mm-hmm. There's no like how can I integrate both of those, because every human integrates both of those in different degrees.
Right. Mm-hmm.
How can I integrate both while maintaining my my masculinity?
Yeah.
I'm enjoying this, by the way, because I never get to have these conversations. Yeah.
No, it's good. I think you're right, because one thing that the movement for women, like and the many amazing things that it's done over the last however many decades it's done, is given like young girls this like really clear vision of like, how much do we see like women, here's what you can do, and potential and empowerment, and given like these really beautiful models for what women can achieve. We see it all the time, right? Whether it's in like sports or technology or business, like wow, like it's incredible, and we're seeing the impact of that kind of messaging.
Yep.
I don't know if out there right now there's the same type of clarity for boys, because I think men are like trying to like reset. Okay, oh wow, this is a new world. It's different than the world of my father and my grandfather, and we're trying to figure out like what is this new vision for men. And I think that kind of often trickles down to these kids. Okay, what's the vision for this type of masculinity that can be this generative, life-giving, protective presence in the world?
Right.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I could not agree with you more. And I think it's incredible that young girls have that path, and it's pretty clear. It's you can grow up, you can be a mother and a successful entrepreneur, or successful with your career, and you can do this while doing that and doing this. And then I think, as you alluded to, and I agree with this message, with that, it's almost like this same message is being presented to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, a lot of, they're not sure where they stand in that crowd, because just like if we do the reverse, and if we look at this honestly, in the past the same thing was true. If we flip it,
Mm-hmm.
and in the past, maybe, I'm not saying this was necessarily the right pathway, but there was a pretty clear path, message for boys, and then that was supposed to be representative of everyone. It didn't include girls, so
Mm-hmm.
it's all just like with most things. We just swung way past. We've overcorrected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, definitely. I think you're seeing the impact of that. It's interesting. I'm curious to know, in your perspective, like, with so many, kids that you work with, and you see the role of dad. The role of dad in the lives of young people. And, it's interesting. As like an 80s, 90s kid, all right, I grew up with a lot of like different, like, dads, right? There was like Full House Danny Tanner, but then there was like Homer Simpson and like Al Bundy. And like I remember growing up like watching, what was that show, like Maury Povich, where he'd be like, "You are not the father," and like and there was this man jumping up and down celebrating that he wasn't going to be a dad. And there were all these like really wild messages about like the role of fatherhood, and we see that changing and morphing and evolving. And I'm wondering how you see the role of dad, in 2024, impacting the lives of kids that you work with and in the educational system.
Yeah. So, and I agree too. As a '90s kid, all these caricatures of these different dads, and and it is funny because, I don't want to speak for you, but sometimes people that I know, and even myself, maybe we've kind of followed one of those, fell into one of those caricatures. Not obviously, not to the extreme, although some people might have. But
there should be like an online test route, like, what 90s dad are you? And you like take a test, and it like comes up with a picture.
I like it. I think so. I think men are trying to figure out how to not always be the leader, because traditionally men typically led. And with that, they're following their wives, they're following women, and they're not necessarily sure when or how to speak up. And I think how I see that playing out in education is sometimes there's not a hard stop with some things, where typically the masculine voice, and this can come from a woman or a man, but generally it comes from a man, where it's like, we got to stop, like, this is too much. This is our problem, this isn't the school's problem, or this is something that we need. Whereas now it's like, I don't want to, I'm not sure how to do that without being, without coming across as insensitive, or without getting my name slandered, or without, my reputation can so, and again, men can advocate for their kids, just like women do with regards to the more empathetic and like more like understanding and the more opportunities. But yeah, that's the major influence I'm seeing, is that this doesn't represent everyone, but this is this is definitely becoming more representative of the entire population, is that there are a lot of kids now where they're not receiving that hard stop, where it's like, we've walked you up until this point, now you need to, like, this is up to you. We're here to help you, but we're not going to keep like pushing all these obstacles out of the way for you. Like, you got to, in an encouraging way, not in a dismissive way, like an encouraged, like, I know you can do this, we're here for you.
Yeah.
So,
you've talked about that before, and I think online is talking about developing resilience and doing things, for kids so much. There's
so much.
Sometimes this like sense of out of the goodness of our hearts, like we want them to live a life of ease and comfort, and like, I understand at the same time that's not necessarily helping them develop the kind of resilience they need in life.
Yeah, for sure. So kids, and this is a very zoomed out way of looking at this, but kids need empathy and they need love, or they need limits. They need both. No, they need empathy and love, and limits, both of those, in different degrees depending on the situation. And the reason why it's so important is because that empathy, that love, helps them feel worthy. They know mom and dad are emotionally available if they need them. But the limits is what helps them build competency. So like they need both. They need to feel worthy and competent. And right now we're really really heavy on the love and the empathy part. Um, and we have kids who they can count on mom, they can count on dad, maybe too much, but we just don't, we're not seeing the competency, like basic things like, and again, I'm trying to be mindful how I speak, but when a child, and there are always exceptions because life's always on a bell curve with everything. Everyone falls into different things, and that you can always you can improve. But a kid in elementary school almost always should be able to understand and accept. It doesn't mean they have to agree with it, but if a teacher tells them to do something that they don't want to do, it's not time for like a debate or like a negotiation. Now maybe we equip them with pro-social skills where they can advocate for themselves. Maybe after class, they could have a private conversation, or they can find an appropriate way to communicate. But it is alarming that we are normalizing some of these things, which comes from too heavy on the accommodation, empathy, love side, and not enough limits.
Yeah. I think there's a lot out there, whether it's like online and all this kind of stuff about, I hate the term gentle parenting because I know that a lot of people, there's a lot of different like meanings for that, and like there's a lot of things that I love about that, and then other things you're like, okay, what's going on? Everyone's kind of trying to figure this thing out in the midst of like an overwhelming amount of information. But I really like what you're talking about as far as creating structure, right, and boundaries for our kids, and how that really helps them develop better resilience and boundaries in their own life later on. What are some other examples of and maybe even asking, like, how do we do that? Like, how do parents, what kind of boundaries do we need to be setting, and how do we do that with kids to help them be successful?
Yeah, so but when I work with clients or teachers, parents, whoever, you always start, when you look at managing behavior, you always want to start at the bottom, which is structure. And the reason for that is because over time, when that structure's maintained, kids internalize the external structure. So, and then eventually it becomes like a passive form of behavior management, and then they can have self-control. So without structure, if you're not, and when I say structure, I'm talking about things like clear expectations and rules backed by consequences, schedules and routines, systems to be efficient when you're solving problems. If you're not pushing kids into some form of structure, you're always playing catch up. You're always going to be in reactive mode. Now in the beginning, you front load and you are in reactive mode until they adopt the structure. It's inevitable. One thing that's unfortunate is so many people have been misled online by the gentle parenting movement, which I agree has lots of awesome things that I agree with and some things that I don't. I think the way we correct that is we just call it authoritative parenting. Problem solved, like that. Like, we know what that understand. We know what that means. But a lot of people are misled, and I cannot tell you how many times, whether it's from a client or DMs, where people have said to me, I've tried so and so's method, fill in the blank, popular parenting influencer, backfired, things are 10 times worse, because what they're essentially, a lot of these accounts are suggesting, it might not be intentional, but what they're suggesting is that if you just look at every situation as I'm going to come in, I'm going to acknowledge them, and we're going to get through it with acknowledgement alone, that's going to help them feel connected, and then problem solved. That acknowledgement is always going to be an essential piece. You have to have it. If like kids need it to, for one, it helps them. It does, and not all the time. It does help them feel regulated, or it does help regulate them. But that needs to be the bridge to the work, which is like, now, after I've acknowledged them and I've tried to meet them where they're at, now we're talking about what is the expectation here? What is the system that we can start practicing right now, so when this problem comes back up, you can go into autopilot mode and you can feel competent and you can solve this on your own. And if you do need me, I'm here, but at least you have that. You have that software. I don't know if software is the right word, but you have that.
I get it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to kind of run itself. So, to your listeners, if there isn't clear, and here's the thing too, is when I work with clients, this is a very common exchange. I would say to you something like, what is the expectation with regard to cursing? And I'll be working typically with husband and wife, and one will say, well, no cursing, and then one will say, well, sometimes, and then one, well, sometimes, and it's not that big of a deal. And even though they thought they had the very clear expectation, like when we started talking about it, it wasn't necessarily uniform, right? So then now all of a sudden there's the inconsistency, and we all know that when there's the inconsistency, kids typically gravitate to the parent who's most convenient with regarding to meeting their needs as soon as possible. So, and I'm not telling people, my job isn't to tell them what the expectation should be. I can give my opinion, but it is my job to say, like, what is it, and how can we make this as clear as possible? Because it's not fair to hold a kid accountable if it's not clear for yourself,
like get clear. What do you believe about this? What's your expectation? What's the vision that you have for your household, for your family? And getting clear on that first, that way you can say what the expectation is, right? And whether you're like in my situation, like I'm divorced, so I have a co-parent, and sometimes that can even be. I have a good relationship with my co-parent. We can align on these different philosophies and expectations, but that can be hard for people. But to your point, like truly important, like how are you gonna like? What's the expectation around cursing, around like dating, around like, boys and girls and touching and physical interactions and video games, screen time, goodness, all that stuff, right?
Bedtime, bedtime.
All those kinds of things are important to have that type of structure. And I like what you say. You're not saying, hey, everyone has to do the same thing, but just whatever you do, get clear on it, get consistent about it.
Yeah, and that's something else too, that like I have my opinions. They're my opinions with regard to what I think kids need. That's not, and there's a time and a place for that, but just like you just said, and you reiterated, it's not about what I or what you think. It's, as, with your partner, with your spouse, like and I cannot tell you enough how often people think that they understand each other's expectations or they have an idea. And then when they sit and talk about it, it's almost as if it's like the first time it was even talked about.
Yeah.
Because these are challenging conversations. It's extremely overwhelming to deal with challenging behaviors. Parenting is 24/7. It's demanding. You don't get days off. And obviously sometimes you might, your kid goes to school, you might be away from your kid, but like, you're always it's always somewhere in the back of your mind. Yeah.
Yeah. What are some of you talk about parents feeling overwhelmed? And I experience that a lot with the clients that I work with, the people I interact with online. People are overwhelmed, and I have my own reasons why that might be. But do you experience that with parents? You feel like a lot of people are overwhelmed?
Yeah. So I get the impression, unfortunately, from a percentage of, I'm just going to say people that I've worked with, because I've worked with a range of people, that unfortunately sometimes it is about being inconvenienced, which is something that we all have to deal with as parents. Super inconvenient. Like, I'd rather, sit down, relax, and having to, repeatedly have my son, like, put his sippy cup on his tray. Like, and this, I haven't talked about that a lot, because that I would absolutely get trashed, and I should have a little more courage, but I would get trashed online, because I do get the impression that some people are avoiding their parental. And here's the thing, but then after talking to some people, what I discover is I think some people just don't know, like, what is expected with this given situation. Lots of times we just automatically think of, we reflect on what we know from growing up. We start thinking, well, what's normal, what's not. But, something that isn't talked about enough is I do think, so I'm 34, I'll be 35, and like my range, it does seem as though there is a percentage, this isn't all of it, I'm going to answer more of what you just said, where there is just like feeling inconvenience and not wanting to do it. And then here comes the digital babysitter, aka the screen comes out. The other thing on top of that with the overwhelm, would just be, and this is true, and I like to be careful about speaking about this too, because people always, it's scary, change is scary. They do have the choice to look for different jobs in different situations, but I do think we're in a time in our lives where it's extremely hard to have one parent work and one parent stay home, like if that is something people are into, just because the cost of living, it's not like it used to be. So like right there, then and there, you have two working parents. People are, they come home, and that is 100% valid. Whereas maybe in the past, someone could have stayed home and been able to give that attention, and then kind of like check, and obviously there's pros and cons to both, but and then a lot of overwhelm, I think, is self-created because of all like you suggested online, and I'm part of this too. I'm guilty of this too. There's just constant inundation of so much information where it's like, well, what is even true? What is normal? What can I do? Versus kind of like tuning some of that out and giving yourself a chance to just try some things for a while. When I say a while, a couple months. It can't be like a couple days. It's got to be a couple weeks to a couple months. What are you seeing with regard to overwhelm with parents?
I mean, definitely the online thing. I mean, definitely the deluge of like, do this, not that. Feed them this, not that. If you feed them this, they're gonna have cancer. If you say things this way, they're gonna have trauma later on. And like, there's so much fear. There's so much fear that we're gonna mess up our kids, and we're almost, the fear of doing harm paralyzes us from actually leaning in to the instincts that we have to be the parent that only we can be, like to like the kids. And so huge online overwhelm. I think there is too. There are structural barriers, right? You're talking about like economy, and it's hard. There are the cost of living, the cost of childcare, all these different things that are kind of pushing, especially at like middle class, working class people, that are challenging. I think that's part of the overwhelm also. But I mean, I think what you said about just you probably see this all the time too, like people become parents and like, what they think about parenting is like all the like the influencers they saw that had a baby, and like the photo shoot and all the cute moments they get posted, and they're so great, and all of a sudden this child comes into your life and it's like a nuclear bomb on your social life, on your sex life, on your relationship, and it's like it's crazy. And I think, and I know a lot of guys like and because I know this is true about me, like, will rock you to a core, because all of a sudden all of this stuff, having a kid is like this major formative like experience for people, and it unearths a lot of things in your own life that have come up to the surface that have never come up to the surface before. And so your own mental and emotional worlds kind of get rocked, and so there's a lot of things that happen in there. And in this day and age, when there's like so many things to do, so many distractions, something that's calling us into like something that's calling for our presence, our resilience, right? Our focus feels like an inconvenience because there's so many other things that are just like we can numb out on,
right?
And so it can feel that way. So I hear what you're saying with that. I think there's something very, very true about that. But I think for guys, I think a lot of dads are trying to figure out their role, their place, and a lot of like, especially new dads, like, got to step out of just seeing yourself as like the B parent, and how do you do that? What's the model for that? What are the skills required? A lot of guys maybe there's just not really a manual for that. So I think that can feel overwhelming for guys as well. Like, how do I connect with this new baby that hasn't been in my body for the last like 10 months? What's my role? How do I support mom? What's my own unique connection with this child? That can feel overwhelming too. So I think there's a number of things why parents might feel overwhelmed. But then I also like step back in the grand scheme of like human existence, right? Like this has always been difficult.
Right. Yeah.
This has always been hard, and people have been doing this for like a very, very long time. And sometimes that perspective, like, okay, people doing this for a long time will continue to do it. I can probably do it too. I can get through this.
I love that. I love that. All I agree with everything you just said. I think the last part, again, people will probably box it out or shut it down because it doesn't fit the current narrative. Just because everything is just not private anymore and put out there, and so visible. I think we do think that we're unique in regard to how challenging parenting is, and I think we're, it's kind of like, I'm a millennial, right? I was born in '90. That's millennial, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So especially like millennials, it's just, I think it is a little bit of a sense of entitlement. Like we're special in that way. Like it's super hard for us, and probably even more so for younger parents who are when in reality it's, sure, and we could have a conversation for hours about things that were different then versus now, and how things would have been easier then versus now, and vice versa. But the bottom line is that, like, parenting it's a call to action every day. It's a choice that you have to make. That, with regards to, am I going to choose to endure this tantrum and this battle and do my best discipline, or am I going to, do I feel as though this should be stopped immediately, and I'll either just not do anything about it or give them a screen. Yeah, so that was great. And then the harm piece, 100% too. This irrational fear of, like, I guess the analogy I'm thinking of, or the metaphor, is like counting calories, or being so specific about everything we say or do, to know exactly what we're giving our kids, in with this naive, optimistic outlook that if we get it just right, they're not going to have any problems when they're older, and like they're going to just be so perfect and so situated into themselves, into society. It's like, it just doesn't. And so it's a huge blind spot too for a lot of people, including myself, is, when we are trying to help kids work through problems, is we have to keep in mind that they have their own perspective, and regardless of what we say, where they're at with the lack of life experience plus their entitlement to their own view, we can be saying and doing all the right things. They can just completely, and they usually do, reject it until they have that experience to decide for themselves if they want to agree with mom or dad or the teacher, or whoever.
Yeah, it's true. There's this almost this sense of, like, what I tell people and what I've told clients is, like, you cannot avoid, like, the trauma of just being human.
Yep.
There is, every day you wake up and you step out your door, there you can't avoid, like, passing on certain things to your kids, things that unconscious or conscious, whatever they are, someday. And actually, hopefully this is true, your kid's going to be in therapy, like, talking about you.
Right.
Just accept it. Like, just be like, look, and maybe the quicker that we accept this imperfection, and that there are going to be things that our kids are going to have to unlearn, maybe we can actually start doing some good work, like, as parents. Like, life is not an Instagram reel. It is not these things that get projected out there. And I think the illusion that somehow, like, we're so much better than the generations before us is often really kind of maybe damaging to us. And it also might rob us of the wisdom of our elders.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we've completely thrown the baby out with the bathwater. Right? I don't like that expression, but what's another expression for that?
I don't know.
I don't know either. But it's one of those things where it's like, if it at all is adjacent to or associated with previous generations, it must automatically be bad. Like, there can't be any truth because of again, some very valid negative components.
Sure.
Right. So it's like, if that negative component's here, and then something that is helpful is adjacent to it here, can't do it. Can't talk. Like, it's just because now we're associated with that. But and then you just touch on something else, which is great, which is, if we accept that we're going to be imperfect, then we pass down that acceptance. The kids they pick up on that presence, and a lot of the anxiety, so much anxiety now, which is completely out of control, comes from this idea that there is this perfect way of doing things, and then all of a sudden, like, we 100% pass on our energy, our presence to our kids. Like, that's the stuff that they really pick up on, the intangibles. Like the words are huge, but just the way we go about life. So if one of the best ways to mitigate, I think, these future problems is to stop. Obviously, don't be negligent, but to stop like so much time, like spending so much time trying to sound great and get everything perfect, and just allow yourself to be messy.
Yeah.
You know, within limits. Like obviously, again, you want to have parameters. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. I have just kind of coming to the end of our time. I do have a question for you, because this is, I think, really important. When clients that I talk to, people I interact with here at in the Daring to Dad space, you deal with kids who are in a lot of different kind of situations, and I just reading your stuff, you experienced a lot of like really intense behavioral like issues with kids, whether it's like physical, mental, emotional, and you've experienced a lot of like energy coming at you.
Oh yeah.
And I'm wondering, what are the tools that you have implemented into your life to help you in those moments? We talk a lot about, regulating our nervous system, which is like kind of a popular idea, a good one. But like, what does it mean? What are the tools that you use to regulate your nervous system? We often talk, like I've talked about dads, that, one of the things that the number one things you can do in your home is realize that you are the largest nervous system in the house. And your nervous system radiates.
Yeah.
One of the gifts we can give our kids is a regulated nervous system. Not a perfect nervous system, not a like always does the exact, but like, how do you implement this into your life in dealing with these big moments with kids?
Yeah. I mean, so the first thing that jumps to mind is just the amount of experience I've had in these extreme situations. I'm partly desensitized to it, which isn't necessarily a good thing, but
yeah, that's honest. I appreciate it.
But a positive way of looking at that would be that I feel very prepared in these situations, and that goes back to structure. So feeling prepared, and one way that you would with regard to structure, and what I'm talking about would be, well, you can't avoid the experience, but to have an idea that, depending on, because every parent is the expert of their child, is anticipation. Like you have, and a big part of anticipation is knowing your kid's signals. So a signal maybe like a sigh, or sucking their teeth, or maybe it could be anything. Usually it's visible or audible. That you go, okay, boom, like. There's a good chance that this is about to be an issue, and then, depending on where you go from there, a lot of it comes from being decisive. Like it's the indecisiveness that I found in these situations that just, it increases anxiety for everyone, and this actually resolves back to my opinion, where as men, it's a natural tendency to be decisive and assertive with what we decide to do. Now, I'm not saying it being aggressive, but what I am saying is that sometimes if it's shutting something down, if you feel like it's appropriate, and I know that's because I've worked with countless people where you try to shut something down and it just escalates and it turns into like even a bigger thing.
Yep.
But knowing and accepting that, like if I decide to do that, or not necessarily shut it down, but if I make this decision, I'm also deciding to do whatever happens next. So I'm accepting that, like I'm going to handle this. This is so vague. I wish I could put this into like an algorithm for you, or like a formula.
Right.
But the themes that come out to me are anticipation and acceptance. Because I've dealt with everything you can imagine from. So I'm a pretty big guy. So kids, like I'm 6'5", so kids as big or bigger, to kids up like past my knee, and attacking me, trying to hurt me. So like that's the extreme physical situation, to just like the verbal aggression. And one of the quickest ways that as adults that we lose in those situations, and I don't like to use the word lose, but because it makes it sound like it's a competition, but that we lose,
Yeah.
is that we don't anticipate well and we don't accept. So we deny what's going on, and when we deny, we usually dig in, and then the power struggles happen. Versus finding ways to accept what's going on and to navigate it based in a realistic way, and then also like to just to be able to anticipate what they're going to do and like how you're going to respond. Here's the thing: is like a lot of what I'm describing is based on experience, so it's intuitive, and it's not necessarily something that I could say like do this or do that, like but how do I regulate myself?
One of the things I hear you saying is like,
Yeah.
you said at the beginning, like, you're going to desensitize, but also I think like you've done it enough to where you're confident in your ability to navigate. And I think that's one thing that's like this takes practice.
Oh, yeah.
Like emotional regulation is a muscle and a skill set. And so like the more you do it, you're like, oh, I can do this. I'm not as threatened by this moment because I've been here before. And I know we're going to get through it. And it might be hard at first, like anything that you like are working at. But over time, that these moments, the meltdown, the moment where you detect that, hey, listen, like I've been telling you to put the iPad away for a while. Now I'm going to have to either shut off the internet or take the iPad away. Those moments that can be like super volatile. You're like, oh, I've done this before and I know they're going to be okay. And we can get through it.
Yep.
Right? Yeah, so that's a good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sometime if you ever want to do this in the future, we could talk about particular situations and we could break down like what that would look or sound like.
Yeah.
But and this is something that I could do better at. And you just said this is, it's important to understand. And this you swipe through and people are swiping through and they're expecting to find the silver bullet. And yeah, maybe there is that nugget of wisdom. Maybe you come across a framework that I suggest, but without the experience, my experience has shown that framework is going to do little good because you might be so dysregulated that it all goes out the window. Now you're in like survival mode. You're not thinking clearly. This or that.
Yeah.
So that is something for everyone out there listening is that there are no shortcuts. You have to endure it with your child if you expect to be able to
100%. Yeah, that is so true. And I think that's going back to something that's been a theme, talking about looking for a shortcut, looking for like a hack where there are helpful tools, right? That be helpful. All of this stuff like takes time and integration. And I think that's where a lot of things like, we come across something online, we're like, oh, I heard that I need to do this in order to have these kind of outcomes with my kid that I want. But if there's no time for like adoption and integration and like practice and like endurance with it, it's never going to materialize, right? And so that's why it's so important. I know you are actively working with parents, and you have like a website where people can work with you like kind of in a one-on-one type of environment. How does that work for you? What are you doing with parents?
Yeah, sure. So my website is coachkasabo.com. So one thing, just because of how busy I did get last year, I do work as a full-time school counselor during the day, and then I was doing this at nighttime. And then my wife and I, we have our son at home. So I will take on clients, but I'm trying to scale it back because I do want to make sure that I have a good balance between my life and work. But my goal when I do get settled, because my wife and I, to make a super long story short, we just sold our house. We got 2 new jobs. We both got jobs in a new district, about an hour outside of Philly. We're going to be moving again soon. So when everything settles, my goal is to make longer form videos. That would be an affordable, like super affordable price. And then people could start with that. And if they still want my services beyond that, then we could link up. But I still am taking on clients. It just depends on my current, how many I have. I just don't want to take on too many.
Yeah, totally. It makes sense, man. Like life is complex, and there's seasons, and man, exactly. A while ago went through a divorce. I was like, I just left for like a year. Just was like, I can't do this for a lot of reasons, but like, man, life has a lot of ebbs and flows. But man, you still most people can find you you're on Instagram primarily.
Yeah, Instagram, Facebook. So Instagram and TikTok. Not as much on TikTok, but it's at Coach Kasabo, and then Facebook, just Kasabo Behavior Management.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And this was really great. I'm so glad that I kind of did a just cold called you and said, hey man, you want to join this podcast?
Yeah.
I'm so glad you said yes. I'm so glad you showed up today, man. It was a pleasure talking with you. Hey, follow Zack, check out his work, and man, let's do this again sometime in the future. I'd like to keep the conversation going for sure.
Yeah, it was nice meeting you, Ron. We're gonna do it again soon.
All right, man. Enjoy the rest of your vacay. Thanks for stepping in today. Talk soon.
Yep, see ya.
All right. Hey, thanks so much for watching, for listening. If you enjoyed it, one way you can support my work is by subscribing, by sharing, all of those things. Thanks so much. I'm incredibly grateful for your support.